Okay, so in this video we're going to be talking about preference setup and some navigation tips. Okay, real quickly, the PDF that I mentioned in the intro video that I'm going to be including literally has all my notes for this entire course, as well as all the hotkeys and preference locations that I'm going to reference in all these videos. Okay, so definitely look to that. If there's something that you forgot what I said in the video, look back to the notes or rewatch the video. Anyway, moving forward, you don't necessarily have to start following along with this video, but by video 4 I would recommend following along so you can ingrain the information. And this video series is aimed predominantly towards Maya users. These steps will make Modo behave more as expected. Regardless of what 3D app you use, though, you'll get what you need out of this series. So anyways, moving forward, when you first launch Modo, you get a blank scene. It won't be this, but you will get a welcome screen pop up right here that'll have links to some tutorials that the Foundry provides. And in the upper right hand corner of that screen, you're going to get a navigation modes drop down, and that's going to ask you how you want to navigate around in Modo. It has all kinds. It has 3D Studio Max, Cinema 4D, default Modo. It has a number of them. It has a few different Maya ones. I would recommend the one that just simply says Maya Navigation. Then you can go ahead and close that window. And I'll show you where that preference lives up in the system preferences too, if you've missed it. Okay, so let's just dive right into the preferences here, and we'll get through this. Don't worry, guys. In preferences, all right. Let's start towards the top. Under application here, you're going to find your number of undo levels. Okay, I set to 200. You never want to go back that far, but handy to have. I think the default is like 30 or 50 or something like that. Okay. Right below that is your autosave settings. Okay, I would recommend enabling this, of course. Modo saves very quickly unless your scene gets really heavy. You won't even notice it. Set your interval between saves, number of save revisions, and then you can set a different location. I've kept the default. Okay, let's move down a little bit more. I'll show you just the more important things. So this one's very important. Under OpenGL, there's a very interesting setting that lives here. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this for a moment. By default, Modo has a trackball style of rotation. Okay, this is a little unwieldy for a lot of people. What's cool about it is you can get any angle you want. It depends on where you click in the viewport and how you drag. Really cool, but a lot of people find it irritating when modeling because their typical navigation mode is the standard upright navigation of most 3D applications. Now for rendering, this is really handy because you can get some cool angles, but you can disable this globally in the preferences. If you really don't like this and you don't want any of your modeling viewports to feature this mode of navigation, which they will by default, then I would recommend going into the OpenGL tab of preferences, making sure trackball rotation is checked off, and then checking on override viewport level trackball options. So now I've got my upright navigation. Okay, it doesn't matter which tab I go to. That's a global override. Okay. Now I don't do that because there are, like in the render window, topology. Sometimes when you're doing topology and in very close, you need a certain angle. So anyways, I'll show you how to change that setting on a viewport specific level. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that off, but it does live here. Okay. So let's go down to FBX. Quickly, what this is going to be is your FBX export settings. Okay. By default, Modo will have none. Okay, and none defaults to export all. Okay, so when you go here to file, there's no export selected here. There's only export as, and it will just allow you to name the file and choose what file format you want. Okay, and then when you choose FBX, it's going to look at these settings over here. So I recommend making a preset. To do that, you'll go ahead and hit New Preset. I've already made mine. Export selected is what I named it. But you'll hit New Preset. You'll go ahead and select everything you want here. I only want geometry and smoothing and things like that really are necessary for modeling and kicking geometry back and forth to Maya with creasing and tact and things like that. I don't need materials or cameras or any animation related type of things. But the most important thing is that you will then change, this will be the default, export all. You'll change that to Export Selection. Okay, and now once you have everything the way you want it, you have to go here and you'll say Store Preset. Okay, now whatever preset is selected here is what it's going to look at when you export. Okay, 99% of the time I like to export just what I have selected in the scene. Okay, so that's handy to know. A little frustrating if you don't know that. So let's cruise down a little further to remapping. Okay, down here, remapping. Now this is where, if you miss that welcome screen, you have all your modes. Okay, 3D Studio Max, several different Maya ones, just Maya Navigation. They even have Soft Image, but Maya Navigation will get it done for you. All right, and then your Alt key is gonna, be what you want there. Okay, let me continue to selection. Okay, this is extremely important, and I'll try to illustrate ignore shading style. Okay, let me talk about partial poly selection first. Okay, so by default, these will be off, and in Modo, your lasso will only select polygons in poly mode, okay, that are, here's your component modes, we'll talk about this later, that are completely enclosed in the lasso, okay? They have to be, if I just get partially through, it won't select it, okay? This isn't the behavior you'd expect if you're a Maya user. You'd think, oh, well, I'll get them all. Well, now you will, okay? If you just clip into it with your lasso a little, it's going to get all of them that are clipped in that way, okay? So allow partial polygon selection does that for you. Now, just a side note, obviously for vertices, they have to be all the way in the lasso. The same goes for edges. So it will not select these edges here if I lasso that. A little off-putting at first, but you'll learn to love that, and you'll wish Maya behaved that way as well, okay? Because it's really handy when you're in orthos and you just want like that edge there. Now, ignore shading style is a little harder to show you, but you'll know what I mean the first time you go into Wireframe and you start trying to select things. Modo uses all three mouse buttons as a selection, and we'll get into this later more in depth, but if I go to poly mode and I have, it doesn't matter whether this is checked not or now, only in Wireframe. If I middle mouse and drag, okay, it's going to, the lasso will select all the way through. If I right mouse and drag, it's basically a backface cull lasso, and I don't know if, because this is in sub D mode, if it's behaving strangely, but either way you see that it won't select geometry behind, okay, so that's right mouse. Now if I go into wireframe mode, okay, if I go up here, there's a shortcut for this, but if I go up here, wireframe, and I have this unchecked, and I middle mouse, it doesn't go all the way through. It flip-flops them. So it flip-flops my right mouse and my middle mouse. I don't like that. I want my mouse buttons to select the same way no matter whether I'm in wireframe or any other rendering mode in the viewport. So I will recommend checking both of these, but definitely checking ignore shading style. Okay, so now my lassos will always do the same thing no matter what mode I'm in. Okay, here's your units. I would recommend leaving the unit system to metric for Maya and Unreal. However, you can change your default unit to centimeters. It will be meters by default. Okay, so if I hit 1 and hit enter, like in my channel box here somewhere, it would go to 1 meter instead of 1 centimeter. So that's up to you. All right, let's look at the last one here. This is just a helpful one. Very bottom under preview. Okay, first things first, let me just sub D this guy, and I'll talk about that later. But under preview, by default, your render preview setting is going to default to starting paused, meaning that when I go to my render tab, the render preview starts paused and I have to click play. This is kind of annoying for the round edge shader because you can't see the result of it except for in the render preview or in finished render, so you're going to be bouncing back and forth a lot. I recommend unchecking this. That way, anytime you switch to your render tab, the render preview just kicks off. Okay. So very, very helpful. All right. So let's go ahead and close our preferences here. Switch back to our modeling tab, default model tab. Okay. Quickly, let's talk about viewport specific preferences. All right. So these are all the global ones. Here in Modo, you have a gear icon up in the upper right hand corner of every 3D viewport. Okay. Now, if you click that, or if you just click it, click off to get rid of it. If you hit the O key, it does the same thing. It brings up your viewport options. Okay. Tear that guy off. So where we have the trackball level rotation here, in fact, I want to go ahead and turn it off because I use it for certain things, but not just in general. So that's going to be under the top tab in the viewport specific settings, down towards the bottom, mouse control, trackball rotation, we'll say no. Okay. Now oscillate does some weird stuff. It has to do with if you have trackball on, you can like throw your viewport. It's really weird. Let's see. You can like throw it and it'll oscillate back and forth. Really weird. So that's kind of trackball only thing. So anyways, we're going to go no trackball. All right. And you can do that for every viewport or just for some, whatever you want. Okay. Now I do turn off orbit selected because you get some weird behavior when you have a bigger scene. That's up to you guys. Modo always does a really good job of just rotating around like wherever the viewport center is anyway and where there's an object. So I'll turn off orbit selected. Okay. All right, here's a really important one. Let's go ahead and let's turn on this cube that I have. I have another mesh item, another object in the scene called cube. All right. So by default, this is what's going to happen. I have this mesh item selected. Let's hit 5 or go into item mode. Okay. And you can just, in item mode, it's like object mode. You can select things in the viewport or you can click here. You see the inactive mesh items, meaning unselected mesh items, will render wireframe. If you click the inactive mesh tab in the viewport options here, you can tell it how you want inactive and active meshes to be rendered. So let's say you want to see everything. You can say make inactive same as active. And that means that obviously it's not selected, but it's still rendering the same. It's just not highlighted because I don't have it selected. Okay. That I toggle on and off depending on what I'm trying to do. I like this, but then sometimes I need to see everything a little bit more clearly for proportion reasons or what have you. Okay, you can play around with your wireframe opacity and color, etc. Right, but that's where that is. Inactive meshes, same as active. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the work plane and the grid real quick. So under visibility, okay, by default, you're always going to see the grid, which is the grid. Nothing exciting there. In fact, this is probably what it'll look like by default. And you're always going to see the work plane, which is this light gray grid here. You see that snapping to my camera? So the work plane we'll get into later, but it's a construction plane. So if I were to draw out a primitive, it draws to the work plane. Okay. It's amazing. We'll talk about it later. There's a number of things you can do with the work plane. It allows you an infinite amount of control over how you model and really what your world axes are. So it's really cool. We'll talk about it later. But some people find it really noisy, including myself, unless I have a custom work plane active. So there's some newer options for the work plane in the last few releases. The one I like isn't always, but only when it's active. So now if I make a selection, and we'll talk about this later, and I activate the work plane, see how it aligns to that selection. But now that I've set a custom work plane, and here's your work plane button here, okay, it's showing it. But as soon as I hit the end key or reset work plane, okay, end key, it goes away. So that's the behavior I like. Now, same with the grid. Grid has a number of really cool things. You can always see the grid, you can never see the grid, or you can see the grid only when you have an inactive work plane. So if I reactivate that work plane, grid goes away. Okay, so some cool stuff there. All right, and these you can toggle on and off to your heart's content. I'll leave it to that for now. Now here's some new ones in like Modo 10.2, 10.1. Faded grid, so it fades out based on the camera. It doesn't just keep going. So it's a camera fall off there. That's pretty nice. It just has a nice look to it and is less noisy. And then I really like color axes. So you can just glance. You don't have to take your eyes down here to see where your Z and your X are. Okay, so those are pretty cool as well. All right, moving on. Let's talk about component visibility. Okay, so let's go to active meshes in your 3D viewport properties. So by default in vertex mode, if I click up here or hit the 1 key, you will not see inactive vertices. Once you select them, you can see them. Okay, this I don't care for because if I have some weird vertex artifacts chilling in the middle of edge loops that I want to know about that's mucking up my topology, you can't see it. All right, so just new to 10.2, you can change this to in vertex mode, meaning only when I'm in vertex mode is it going to show me inactive vertices. Okay, so if I switch to edge mode, poly mode, item mode, you don't see them, only in vertex mode. Now if I go in component modes, if I'm in vertex, edge, or poly mode, you can see them, but once I go to item mode, they go away. All right, but I like only when I'm in vertex mode to see vertices. Okay, pretty cool. All right, so last thing on preferences, and then just a couple quick shortcuts, and we're done with this one. I'm going to include a custom radial menu. because I'll show you how there's a few handy primitives here, some modeling tools, really common, useful modeling tools. But the most important thing of it is the round edge tags sub-pie menu that I've set up here. Okay, so this is how you can quickly tag your polygons for the round edge shader. Now I'll show you how to do it manually, but it's tedious. And once I show you how to do it manually, you'll see that this way is the way to go. Okay, so to import my custom pie menu, you need to go to File, go to Config Import down at the bottom here. Okay, and this is the one I'm going to include it. Let's see, I have it in my Dropbox right now, but I'm going to give you a folder with all these resources, game asset creation using the round edge shader, and it's going to be right here, derricksutilities.config. Okay, so go ahead and just hit open, and once you've imported it, now we have to assign it to a hotkey to get it to work. So go to System, Form Editor. Don't stress out about the form editor right now. Okay, we can talk about that another time or in another series about making custom pies. But I've filtered this. By default, this is what you get. Okay. To find my pie menu, it's going to be tucked under Groups, this top one here, Pie Menus, and then I've got it in blue here, Derrick's Utilities. Now, if you can't find it that way, okay, and it has all the commands underneath it, you can look down into those if you want to see how I've done this. But if you can't find it, go ahead and hit this F key, and then type in, this will be what you get. Type in my name, Derrick, and it pops right up. Okay. Go ahead and just right-click on that, say Assign to Key, type in whatever key you want. If you choose something that has a hotkey, it will tell you what it is, and if you hit OK, it'll ask you, are you sure you want to overwrite it? I've got Alt-Q. It's easy to get to, and it was like quit Modo or something I never want to do by accident. So Alt-Q is good for me. You'll hit OK, and then you will hit that key, and you'll be good to go. Okay, and you'll see the custom pie menu. Super useful. Now, if we close Modo, it should write our config. It should write everything we've done to the main config. I recommend going to File and Config Save. Okay, because then it'll write all these changes to preferences we made to the config file. If Modo were to crash right now, it probably wouldn't save everything we've done. So now we've saved our config. Last thing is a few camera shortcuts. Okay, in Maya, you're hitting F to frame. This is, Shift A in Modo. Okay, if it frames in on your selection, Shift A. Now, if I just hit A, it fits all. It pulls way back and it fits all. But Shift A is what you want. Now, this is a really cool one. I wish Maya had it. We're just going to expand that selection. If I'm over here and I'm like, I don't know, edge, loop slicing or something like that, then I'm like, I want to get back over to these polys. Control A, whoops, my bad. Control A will align, it will fit and align your camera to the selection. Now, it may not seem like it's aligned until I hit Shift A, and you'll see that it is. So the camera is, it's a really handy one if it rotates everything for you. Control A, it'll fit and align. Okay, and then you can Shift A to get in closer. All right, so that's it for this video. Let's move on, and we'll talk about the items list and maybe some primitive creation in the next video. So I'll see you then.